Hello and welcome to a new video. My name is Ebony. I hope you are doing very well. I'm excited to be concluding my summer reading experience, doing a summer reading wrap up for the month of August. I did do something different for this video. I am going to rank them from subjectively my least favorite thing that I've read to my most favorite, or some of my most favorite reads of this summer. Just overall, I feel like this summer was pretty interesting. I read 9 books in August, only 4 in July, but still that's like pretty good. I already discussed my July reads in a previous video, so I'll have that link down below. But without further ado, let's just get started with my first least favorite book that I read in August, and that was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. The story opens with us discovering that there is a human skeleton that was buried underneath the Heaven and Earth grocery store, and then we go back in time to see who it was, what happened, and why it happened. Now, objectively, I think James McBride, his entire purpose in writing this novel is to highlight the importance of community, specifically in celebrating diversity and working together as a community in order to thrive. Basically, the whole thing of one hand washes the other. However, I subjectively did not necessarily vibe with this book because I felt like there were way too many perspectives. And if you know me, I typically only read from one or maybe 2 perspectives. I don't really read stories where I'm engrossed or I'm following many different characters. And when I say many, I mean like there were at least 10 that we got perspectives on. And for me, it took away from the reading experience, but it all came together in the end. So that's why it's one of my least favorite reads from August. So if you don't know, August was Seeley Challenge Month, which was created by Nicole Seeley, a poet, with the purpose, the intent of encouraging people to read more poetry in the month of August. The main challenge is that you read a book of poetry every day in August, totaling out to 31 books at the end of August. That was my intention going into August. I really wanted to read more poetry. I did not achieve the challenge, but I did read more poetry than I typically do. So here are some poetry collections I read. I first read this wonderful little chapbook, An Imaginary Affair. This is still ranked from my least favorite to most favorite, even in the poetry collections. This was nice. It was just very short. Obviously, it's a chapbook. I don't remember much from it, which is not a bad thing, but this poet's intention was to basically praise the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, who I'm familiar with his work. His work tends to focus on the love and appreciation for nature, also romance. It's very romantic work. And this poet was basically making sense of her life and her love for the Chilean poet, basically emulating his work. I thought it was nice. I love the premise. It's just like, it just wasn't a favorite. That's it. Not every book we read will be a favorite, you know? I also read Dear Outsiders. This is by Sadre Orafai. And this was a really interesting poetry collection because it's prose poetry and it's just essentially written in paragraph form. It follows 2 sisters living on a coastal or living in a coastal tourist town, beach setting. It's all about their appreciation for the beach and the waves and the ocean. This is like a hint. It's kind of like the topography of their lives, living in the ocean and then moving into the mountains after their parents tragically pass away. And it's about the 2 sisters reckoning with the change of environment, the drastic like opposition of being on the water and flowing and just being easygoing, and then being in the mountains where it's a little more rigid and the terrain is different. So it was an interesting metaphor for how they navigate their own trauma and grief. The writing in here was stunning. Absolutely loved it. The perfect summer read if you wanted to be sad at the beach. Like if you love a good cry on the beach looking at the waves, I feel like this is a good book. I also read The Tradition by Jericho Brown. Now, I love this poetry collection. It was a bit heavy, but this is ranked a little higher because Jericho Brown is known for creating a form of poetry called the duplex. And the best way I can explain this is that each stanza consists of 2 lines, and the poem starts out with an idea or with an image, and then at the end of the poem it meets back or refers back to those first 2 lines and kind of turns it on its head or introduces something new about it. That's the best way I can explain this. An example, there is one on the back here. You can pause to read it, but this poetry collection was very heavy. It's about like trauma that the Black body has faced throughout history, also struggles in love. Yeah, it was just a really heavy poetry collection to read, but it was so good. And like the duplex poems, I want to write a few of my own. I thought they were a really cool and interesting form of poetry. Next, I'll talk about Couplets by Maggie and Milner. I think I did speak about this book, but I technically finished it transitioning from July into August. But Couplets is a poetry collection of couplets, which is a form of poetry during which it's also written 2 lines in a stanza that kind of go together. This poetry collection was about a girl who had a boyfriend long term. She's a poet, she's a writer, and then she meets a woman one day in a bar and goes on or explores her first queer relationship from that. And it was all about love, the ways in which love manifests itself, which is pretty interesting because the meaning has a double entendre, using couplets as a form of poetry and then also thinking of a couple, like a pair. So I really enjoyed that about that collection. I listened to it on Audible and I thought it was so good. And I think it's always just nice to engage with poetry reading when it's read from the poet themselves. I think it's pretty cool. But yeah, so sorry, the weather has changed and I feel like my voice sounds so froggy. Okay, so next up I read Promises of Gold. This is by Jose Olivarez, and this was so good. I love this poetry collection. I think it's perfect for beginners. And what was really cool about this is it's Jose Olivarez's reckoning with toxic masculinity, deconstructing that. It's also a celebration of communities that are trying to make a home out of the United States, immigrants. He discusses a lot in this poetry collection his Mexican heritage, but then also like the falsities of the American dream and the problems of capitalism. But it's more so a celebration of the promises of gold, which is just essentially the ways in which we love ourselves, we love people we're in romantic relationships with, but then also brotherly love was very much highlighted in here with his friends, with his brothers. So I thought it was awesome. This poetry felt so alive. It felt like reading music, and it's pretty cool because as you can see, this is one version of the cover, and then if you flip it over, this is another. And then the 2 translations of English and Spanish are included here. So I thought this was so cool. I've never encountered a book where both translations are included. So I thought that was cool. I also read Before You Suffocate Your Own Full Self. This is by Danielle Evans. This is a collection of short stories, and I loved it. Like, I loved these short stories. So now we're getting into my favorites, as you can see. I loved these short stories all about suffocating your own full self, meaning the full self being your innocent or naive self, and the events that turn that innocent and naivety into an understanding of like, oh, this is how the world works, like this is what the world is like. And that's where these stories take a home in that transition of thought or like of awareness of the world, specifically for people in marginalized communities. So the first story that I really loved was about two young girls who are in high school. They're just like exploring their bodies and sexuality, and they like boys, and they're sneaking into bars and using fake IDs, and then they like encounter predatory men, and they're like, wait, like one of them has a revelation of like, okay, this is what the world is truly like. Another one is called Snakes, and that was probably my favorite because it was about the ways in which you can use someone or not take up for someone and the lasting impacts or implications of that. Yeah, I thought this short story collection was really, really great, and I definitely recommend that you read it. I took so long to read it, but I'm happy I did read it this August. I read The Guest by Emma Cline. I finished this in, I'm like totally matching this book right now. I finished this in September, I'm sorry, but I started and read most of it in August, so I'm counting it as a summer read. We're following Alex, who is in her early 20s. She is a grifter, like just takes advantage or can easily spot like people who she can take advantage of. So we are following her in this like rich area, kind of like Hamptons-esque, outside of New York City on an island. She was in a relationship with like a 50-year-old man, and she does something that messes up that relationship, making her living situation insecure. And she also has this person called Dom that's following her because she did something really messed up to him. Not justifying, he's like totally stalking her and harassing her, but she just like gets herself into these situations. So all we're doing is following her on this journey over Labor Day weekend in this beautiful beach town where people are rich, and she's just like sneaking into beach clubs and making friends with like certain people, and like it's just totally messed up what she's doing. And it was fun, I'm not gonna lie. This is my first read from Emma Cline, and I think her writing was just so like, it flows so well. However, I will say one thing about this book is like it made me realize that maybe I am exhausting my attention level for 20 somethings just doing messed up things and like totally following them around, just like vibes. I want to read something else, so which is why it got me into my fall TBR. But yeah, it was good. I liked it. I think you should read it. It deserves all the hype it's getting because it's very hyped on the internet right now. And then last but certainly not least, in my number one spot, are we surprised? I finished reading Devotions by Mary Oliver in August, and it was so nice because I finished reading it on August 2nd and I started reading it on August 2nd of 2022. So Devotions is like over 400 pages of Mary Oliver poetry, taken from, curated by Mary Oliver from her poetry collections, kind of like her version of a greatest hits album. It was so nice to revisit a lot of my favorites, but then to also discover new favorites. Also, I was like, okay, I need to read certain collections because I just gravitated to their subject matter a little more than others, but we all know how I feel about Mary Oliver at this point. I just think that the way Mary Oliver captures the world and nature so beautifully, so honestly, and so simplistically is an art within itself. Her poems are very accessible and easy to read, and I just love that about her, and it's always a joy. Like, I smiled a lot reading it, and it just makes you feel happy to be alive, which is what you want to feel like in the summer and always. So yeah, That was it. Those are the books I read. They're right here. A nice little lovely stack. Ranked from my least favorite to most favorite. Reads of August. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.